Morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's an absolute pleasure to talk to such a young audience. I have never talked to such a young audience before. When I was given the topic to speak, the Green Revolution, the second Green Revolution, I added a phrase called a defining era. I will talk to it, more of it later in my talk. But while waiting for this event to begin, I got into a conversation with a very charming young lady, and while trying to explain to her the kind of work I and my organization do, I asked her a simple question that whether she ever think of from where the food stuff comes when she buys the food stuff from the departmental store. The answer was simple no. It is not surprising actually. But what she remembered perhaps was the Monsanto seed controversy, and asked me that what is this Monsanto seed controversy. Similarly, when I was talking to the previous speaker, the first thing she asked me was, have you heard of this BT cotton controversy, and do you support or you are against the biotechnology? So why I narrated these two incidents was that food security and the Green Revolution has many facets, and often what we remember is the controversies that the media throws up without realizing how much more of the story lies behind the food stuff that we buy and eat in our daily lives. I will begin I see that most of you are post 1960s. So many of you must have heard the word Green Revolution. It is nowadays used ad nauseum. But I don't know how many of you are known to or know this story. How many of you have heard the term PL480, the name Dr. Norman Borlaug, the name C. Subramaniam? Can you raise your hands? How many of you know? Okay, fair, a few. This is not surprising because most of you are born post 1960s. Even I have a very faint memory of it. So I'll begin with this story of the first Green Revolution and the story of the PL480. In 1960s, our country was faced with a crippling food shortage. And the country used to virtually live on the shipment of wheat from USA. And this wheat was called PL480. It was the story of the wheat from ship to the mouth. And this was the era when a relatively young scientist, Dr. Norman Borlaug, was researching on the high-yielding wheat varieties in Mexico, called the dwarf wheat varieties, because plants were smaller in size. And then there was a person called C. Subramaniam, who was the then Agriculture Minister of India. Nowadays, we are very fond of ridiculing or abusing the politicians. But this Agriculture Minister, when was approached by Norman Borlaug for the introduction of his high-yielding wheat varieties in India, without hesitation, overruled every bureaucrat and said yes. And rest is history. From a food shortage, we came to a stage where we are food surplus nation. Still many of us are undernourished, don't get the sufficient food is another story. That's a different aspect or different facet of the food security. So in a brief presentation that I have made, I have tried to put many challenges and the constraints that we face today. I have tried to generalize and simplify the issues because we can't go into the technicalities in such a short period of time. But I hope that many of this young audience would find some of these issues challenging enough to explore it further. Now, at the moment, what are the challenges for food security? We have on the one side the demand of the population growth, changing dietary habits, And there's on the other side, there's a constraint on the total production. There's a hunger and poverty, there is a water scarcity, lack of agriculture. We can't expand the land on which we till. The petroleum products are depleting. And we have also seen the changing climate. Many of you must have heard this debate of the climate change, but some of us, or the people, or even the farmer who is battling it on the field, have seen the crippling effect of the climate change on the agriculture production. The yields that were rising after the first green revolution have flattened out. The farmer in Haryana, Punjab, our wheatlands know this fact very clearly. At the same time, what we see is a lack of vision and the political will to address the issue. Recently, the Sir John Beddington, he is the advisor to the Prime Minister of the UK, warned in 2011 of a perfect storm of issues that could lead to the food shortages, public unrest over the few decades. And many of the political thinkers believe that the unrest that has spread over the Middle East had the genesis in the food riots and the food crisis that arose abruptly around 2008-2009. This slide will show you where the incidence of hunger is most prevalent. And you see, India is right in the middle of it. Despite being a food surplus nation, today we rank very high in the hunger vulnerability. Next, please. The another issue that we see today is the rising petroleum prices. But not many of us know that in 2014 or about, the petroleum production would peak, and thereafter it is going to gradually decline. It will have a tremendous impact on the agriculture production because many of the inorganic fertilizers and the inputs come from the petroleum. Next. Another issue related to the climate change, as you can see from this graph, the perfect overlapping of the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere and the rising temperatures, which have risen alarmingly over the last 2 decades. Another issue that needs a little bit of our attention is the glacier changes. This is particularly true or important for a country like ours, where most of our rivers, particularly the northern rivers, are glacier based. Now, if we look closely at the Indian situation, the areas which had the benefit of the Green Revolution now has a tremendous problem of the depleting groundwater. The quality of the irrigation systems is poor, and the decrease in the water table is very alarming. Now, this is recently this study had come about, and the aggregate demand, if you look at India's only, around 2030 would be some 1,500 billion cubic meters or liters. And the gap which will remain is of the tune of the 50% in the supply in India. And 80% of this water demand goes into the agriculture, which becomes more alarming when we think that we have to produce more by 2030 to feed our population, when the availability of water is going down. When you look at the bigger picture of the South Asia, and India is in the middle of it, the first challenge is that we see the groundwater decrease and declining water tables, the decrease of the glaciers, and the heat and water stresses. And the alarming part is that the predictions are that our wheat or maize production, and I'm taking only these 2 examples because my organization works in this field, is going to come down by about 40 to 45% around 2050 or 60, whereas our population will be peaking at that point of time. Now, if you look closely at this graph, I'll try to just take a minute and explain this graph. This is the rate of increase, or the way our production is rising for the wheat and maize. If nothing happens, this is the, and we go as business as usual, this is the rate at which we are going. But to feed our population, what we need is this graph going this way. Now, the only the forces that can push this graph up are the agronomic practices or the breeding of high-yielding varieties or the newer crops. But the forces that are acting against it, the new diseases coming out because of the climate change, the water and nutrient energy deficiency, and the climate change heat effect. And when I talk of the heat effect, there's a phenomena called the terminal heat. When you suddenly feel that around February or March, you are one day using the quilt, next day you are suddenly using the air conditioner. The temperature goes up by 4 or 5 degrees. Many of us don't know that the wheat is a cold climate plant, naturalized to a tropical condition. Its mechanism shuts down when the night temperature goes up beyond 15 degrees centigrade. And the productivity is very heavily affected. So the temperature range, the impact of the climate is going to be very, very severe on our food production. This is the impact which was recently, a study came out and showed that what is going to be the global impact of the warming on the agriculture around the world. And you can see that India is going to be one of the worst affected countries. And this is going to be the first affected countries. So this slide will just give you a flavor of what is in store for us. What is meant to by a rise in temperature and how it is going to affect our production. I'll just skip these because these are a little technical. So we are at the crossroad now. That is why I call it a defining era. The decisions that we take, the choices that we make today is going to decide whether we are just going to survive or we are going to thrive, not only as a country, not only as a region, but globally. Now, is the entire story pessimistic, or do we have some options or some solutions? And in this regard, I'll just quote what Einstein said once, that we cannot solve a problem with the same thinking we used when we created those problems. Now, one of the solutions that immediately comes to our mind, it is a little technical, but I'll try to generalize it or make it simple for you. When we look at our country, you see that these are the highest producing areas of Punjab and Haryana. There's something called a crop can achieve potentially, something is called which we actually achieve. And this gap is called the management gap. You see the management gap here is very small. But you look at the eastern UP, Bihar, Nepal, Bangladesh, Tamil Nadu, and you see this gap is pretty huge. So what this graph tells you is that in the short run, if we can simply do some better management, we can bridge this yield gap, and it will take care of us or our requirement in the shorter run. But in the longer run still, we'll have to look for the better technological solutions, the innovations. Next please. Now, this is one slide. I'll again quickly go through it. When I talked about the water scarcity by 2030, the 750 billion cubic liters that will be falling short of, this graph basically tells that what are the low-cost solutions up to this and what are the high-cost solutions. And you must have read in the newspaper the Supreme Court asking the government to look for this national river linking project. And you see that this is one of the highest costing solutions for our water scarcity. And we normally, when I said that this is a defining era, the choices that we make, the decisions that we take, will decide where we go. And if we start making this kind of a high value solutions, we may perhaps miss the bus. Now, a few things that I don't think that most of you are familiar with agriculture, but there's a term called conservation agriculture, which can use to bring that, bridge that gap which I talked about in the earlier slide. Conservation agriculture, I don't know how many of you have heard this term, or agriculture without plowing, without tilling, where you don't plow or you don't till the fields. You just go and use the residue, whatever is there, to recycle back to the soil, to maintain the nutrient, the soil moisture, texture, etc. Then the second is how you help this poor farmer with the newer technology, to give him the benefit of the technology, the assistance of the packages, which help this poor farmer to get more from his crop. Recently, now I'll be coming to, in the next 2 minutes, talk a little bit about my organization, how we work, what we do. In 2010 Presidential Day address, the Independence Day address, our Prime Minister spoke about the agricultural crisis that the country is on the verge of, and announced the establishment of Borlaug Institute for South Asia in honor of the Nobel laureate Dr. Borlaug. This institute, I'm happy to announce, is being now set up, and my organization is setting it up. Our relationship with the Borlaug is, Dr. Borlaug used to be a scientist from our organization, and it is the legacy, his legacy, that we cherish, and it's his memory we are. So this is the institute. This is Dr. Norman Borlaug's picture, and this is being established at 3 locations. One in the high productivity area of Punjab at Ludhiana, other is the central India, the tribal hinterland, the Jabalpur, and third is the eastern part in Bihar, the Samastipur. This is basically what the Borlaug Institute is going to deliver. I'll just speak for a moment. We will be putting up the state-of-art agriculture research institutes, which will be researching on the many of the issues that I talked about earlier, and deliver the crop that will overcome these challenges and give us higher yields to feed our millions. Thank you.